We know that heart disease runs in families, but is it the genes or is it the lifestyle factors that influence the cardiovascular risk? Like father, like son. Turns out it's not so true for Mexican Americans. That's a topic of a recently published paper in the Journal of American Heart Association, which looked at the association of visceral adipose tissue and subclinical atherosclerosis in Mexican Americans who were born in the US and also their parents who moved to the US a few years ago. And the findings are pretty fascinating. The researchers were analyzing the data from more than 500 Mexican Americans, both the immigrants who moved to the US from Mexico and also from their children who were born in the US. They were doing an ultrasound to measure the wall thickness of carotid arteries. Carotid arteries are the arteries on your neck that make the most supply to your brain. And we can measure the thickness of the wall. The thicker, the higher the cardiovascular risk and the more atherosclerosis you have in your body. The researchers were also looking at the body composition using a DEXA scan, measuring the visceral fat around the inner organs. And while they divided the study population into four quartiles according to the visceral adipose tissue volume. So the first quartile has the least amount of visceral adipose tissue, which is the most beneficial. The fourth quartile has the most, which is the metabolically most harmful. The ones who had the least visceral fat were also thinner. The difference was almost 20 kilograms or 43 pounds. They also had a tighter waist. They were leaner. They had a lower risk of developing high blood pressure, a lower risk of developing diabetes and metabolic syndrome. And interestingly, there was no significant difference between these groups in terms of income or education. So no matter if these families were poor or rich, the increased risk was about the same for the increased visceral fat tissue. When people had lower volume of visceral fat, their intima media thickness, the thickness of the carotid wall was also lower, indicating a lower risk of atherosclerosis. And so the abnormal carotid study was found in about 26% in people in the first quartile of visceral adipose tissue volume versus almost 66% in the fourth quartile. That means a 2.5 times higher risk in the fourth quartile. Now, when the researchers put down a correlation plot between the visceral adipose tissue quartiles and the carotid intima media thickness, they found out that there was really no association whatsoever in the first generation of parents who just moved to the US versus the second generation, the children who were born in the US. They had a higher risk of increased intima media thickness in the fourth quartile. Now, what was the difference in this research study between the first and the second generation of Mexican Americans? Most importantly, it was the dietary habits. The first generation who moved to the US, they were sticking to their original recipes, eating a lot of beans, a lot of vegetable fajitas, versus the second generation. It turned out they didn't really know how to cook, and they were more dependent on fast food. So this research study suggests that recipes that run in families are more powerful than the genes. And I'd like to hear from you. What's a traditional family recipe that's health promoting, that could improve your own health and the health of your children? Please post in the comments below. Thank you.